Welcome to our deep dive today. We're going to be looking into this magician calls himself Peter the Adequate.
Okay.
And our source material is a little bit unusual. It's actually an online magic lecture, but I think you'll find it's about a lot more than just the tricks. It really gets into performance philosophy and the art of connecting with an audience, especially when that audience includes kids.
Yeah, and it's really interesting that his focus really is on the audience. He has this great line at the end. He says, it's not about the magician, it's about the audience.
Yeah.
And that really struck me as something that applies to so many things, not just magic.
Yeah, it's like that old saying, the customer's always right, or, put yourself in someone else's shoes. It's like all those things. It's so simple, and yet, it's advice that we could all probably take to heart a little bit more.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And what I love is that he actually walks the walk. At the beginning of his kid shows, he actually has them practice specific reaction.
Oh.
So like he'll have them practice saying R, yay at
Mm.
certain points
Wow, that's interesting.
so that he can kind of keep things moving,
Yeah.
but also have them really feel like they're part of the show.
Yeah, yeah. It's almost like he's choreographing their energy.
Exactly. It's about setting those
Yeah.
expectations and giving them permission to really get into it.
Yeah. All right, so let's get into some of Peter's actual tricks. And I gotta say, his opening act's a little bit unexpected. I mean, the guy pulls a seemingly endless stream of sponge balls and streamers out of his mouth.
I know. It sounds so strange, but
Mhm.
it's actually a brilliant illustration of his philosophy in action. Think
Really?
about it. He could do a regular card trick.
Yeah.
I mean, everybody's seen that.
Mhm.
But this is something that immediately grabs your attention because it's so different.
It's totally different. And it kind of ties into what he talks about a lot, which is this idea of breaking expectations. He says it has to be done tastefully, of course, but that element of surprise can make a huge difference.
Yeah, it makes you sit up and take notice. And, that's important in any field where you're trying to, communicate with people or persuade them. Think about marketing. The brands that really stand out are the ones that do something you don't expect.
Like that ad campaign. I'm thinking about one where they had that giant inflatable rabbit in Times Square. You
Yes,
couldn't miss it.
exactly. Now, back to his sponge ball routine. I mean, he's using different sizes of sponge balls, some that turn inside out, and then he's got these really long streamers.
Yeah,
It just keeps going.
that sounds like a lot to manage, especially with your mouth.
I mean, that's part of the skill, right?
Yeah.
And he really emphasizes that, even with a trick like this, the mechanics really have to be invisible. The audience shouldn't be able to see how he's doing it.
Right.
It's all about maintaining that illusion.
It's funny too because he actually throws in this super quick gotcha trick, like the world's fastest magic trick, which of course isn't really magic at all,
Right. But it's like this little wink to the audience. Yeah. Yeah.
especially the kids. It's that's this really playful tone and it just lets them know they're in for something fun and unexpected.
Yeah, for sure. Speaking of kids, let's talk about Peter's routine with the coloring books.
Mm-hmm.
He originally got this idea from another magician named Dan Murphy, who would use coloring books for this sort of three-card Monte routine.
Right, but he actually had to adapt this
Okay.
because so many kids have magic kits these days
Hmm.
that they might already know the secret.
Oh, that's interesting. So how did he change it?
He switched to using giant playing cards, and then he uses these silly disguises. So it's still the same basic principle,
Hmm.
but the presentation's totally different and a lot more engaging for kids who maybe already have that basic magic knowledge.
Right, right. It's almost like, how teachers have to constantly come up with ways to keep their lessons fresh.
Absolutely. And he makes this really important point about performing for kids.
Yeah.
He says you have the feed to genuinely enjoy it.
Like the energy that you bring is contagious. If you're not having fun, the kids are going to pick up on that.
Oh, 100%. You can always tell when someone's just phoning it in.
Right. And the opposite is true too. When you can see someone's really passionate about what they're doing,
Yeah.
it just shines through.
Totally. All right, let's move on to his rope routine. This is where he takes 3 ropes of different lengths, and through this whole hilarious series of bits, they magically end up being the same size.
Right. And it's really brilliant how he uses this overkill approach.
Okay.
Like he's using multiple wands. He's acting like they keep breaking. It's just this escalating sense of absurdity.
So it's not just about the trick itself, it's about the whole performance around it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And that's something that could apply to so many things. Think about a great stand-up comedian. It's not just about the jokes.
Right.
It's about their delivery, their timing, their persona.
It's true. Like, I could read a joke out of a book, but it's not going to be nearly as funny as if, Chris Rock told it.
Right. And in Peter's case, he uses that overkill to create these moments where the audience is really in on the joke. Like they know it's ridiculous, but they're laughing along with him.
Yeah, totally. Okay, next up, the wrist tie escape. This is where he gets his wrists tied together super tight and then poof, he's free almost instantly.
It's such a classic escape routine, but he adds this really interesting twist. He'll actually have an audience member tie their companion up first, just as tightly,
Oh, okay.
so that they can vouch for how secure that knot is.
Right, so there's no question.
Exactly, so it removes any doubt.
Yeah, and it makes me think about, that whole idea of misdirection, right? He's
Yeah.
getting you to focus on how tight that knot is while he's very subtly, manipulating the rope in a way that'll let him escape.
Yeah. It's like those pickpocket videos where they bump into you and you're so focused on whether your wallet's still there that you don't even notice that they're slipping your watch off.
That's a great analogy, actually. I never thought of it that way. So it's not just about this sleight of hand, it's about really controlling the audience's attention.
Exactly. And that's something that, we can all learn from, whether we're giving a presentation or, negotiating a deal,
Hmm.
or even just trying to convince our kids to eat their vegetables.
Yeah, right. All right, before we move on to some more tricks, I do want to mention this interesting interlude that he has where he talks about the theory of magic. And he says one of the most important things is silence.
I love that because he compares magic to a conversation.
Hmm.
And it's not just about him, talking at the audience. He has to give them space to react, to process what they've just seen.
Yeah. It's almost like, those pregnant pauses in a movie sometimes.
Yes,
It can be so much more powerful than any dialogue.
absolutely. And it applies to a lot more than just magic. Think
Yeah.
about public speaking. A well-placed pause can make your message so much more impactful.
Yeah. Yeah. It gives people time to really think about what you're saying.
Exactly. And he also really emphasizes the importance of constantly refining your material. So even jokes or lines that he thinks are funny,
Mm.
he's always tweaking them,
Yeah.
looking for ways to make them even better.
It's like they say, right, good is the enemy of great.
Right. You
Ugh.
can't get complacent. Even when you think something's good, there's always room to improve.
Absolutely. Okay, let's get into this one routine that he does with cards that's specifically tailored to the parents at kids' parties.
Ooh, yeah, this is great.
So, I mean,
He knows the parents are the ones who hired him,
right.
so he wants to make them feel special too.
Yeah. So he does this whole bit where he pretends to be reading their minds and asking them, seemingly simple questions about a card that's hidden.
But he's subtly leading them to the right answer.
Right, right.
So he's creating this illusion that they're somehow in control.
It's like he's playing chess with their minds.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think it's such a great reminder that effective communication is often about guiding people,
Mm.
not just telling them what to do.
For sure. Now, one of his routines I thought was really fascinating is squishy stars. It's basically a sponge ball routine, but he does it with stars instead. And he just adds these layers of complexity and misdirection.
It's incredible. He uses what's called a triple load,
Mm-hmm.
which means he's secretly palming 3 stars at once.
Okay. That sounds pretty hard to do.
It takes so much practice dexterity,
Mm.
but what's really interesting is then he'll actually explain the trick wrong to the audience.
Wait, so he shows them the moves, but he gives them bad instructions.
Exactly.
Huh.
And it works because even though they're seeing him do it, they can't quite figure out how he's doing it because he's misdirecting their attention.
Oh, so it's kind of like when you watch those cooking shows and they leave out an ingredient.
Yes.
You could follow the recipe exactly, but you're still not going to get the same thing.
That's perfect.
Yeah.
And it just speaks to the power of that misdirection. We think we're seeing the whole picture, but there are these tiny little details that we might be missing.
Yeah. And, he connects this to his own ADHD, and he wonders if the way his mind works is actually an advantage when it comes to, creating these more complex routines.
I love that. It's like what we think of as weaknesses can actually be strengths in disguise.
Yeah, totally. All right, let's talk about his red card switch trick. This one starts with him forcing a red card on an audience member.
Right,
And he even mentions that he uses a marked card so he can keep track of it.
right. He uses a technique called crimping, which means he just bends the card slightly so he can feel it.
Okay.
But the interesting part is he doesn't even use that marked card for the final switch.
Wait, really? So that's just another level of misdirection.
Exactly. He wants the audience to think that they're following that marked card.
Mm-hmm.
But the real switch is happening somewhere else entirely.
It's like he's playing 4D chess while everyone else is playing checkers.
Exactly. And it really highlights how our brains work, Like we tend to see what we expect to see.
Oh, totally. It's like when you lose your keys and you keep looking in the same place, even though they're obviously not there.
Yes.
Yes.
And so his magic isn't just about entertainment. It's about making us question our perceptions and think more critically about how we process information.
I love that. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here from Peter's, unique opening act to his psychology-driven escapes and mind-bending card tricks. But I feel like we're just scratching the surface.
Oh, there's so much more to unpack. And in the next part, we're going to delve deeper into his thoughts on performing for different audiences, the importance of silence and timing, and how he constantly tweaks and refines his material.
This has been awesome. I can't wait to hear more. It's funny thinking back to that squishy stars routine. What's so interesting to me is how he uses the teaching process as misdirection.
It's brilliant. It's almost like reverse engineering the audience's expectations. Like
Ah,
he's being so transparent. You see
yeah.
the moves, but then he explains them wrong, and it keeps the method a total mystery.
It's like he's saying, here's how it's not done, and then it makes you even more curious about how he actually pulls it off.
Right. And it really makes you think differently about how information is presented. Like, it challenges you to be more critical. You're watching, but the words are throwing you off.
Yeah, totally. And it kind of makes me think about that thing he mentioned about his ADHD, right? And how he wonders if that helps him come up with these routines that are so layered and tricky.
I love that. Like, it takes what people might think of as a weakness and turns it into a strength.
Yeah.
Maybe thinking differently helps you see things that other people miss.
Yeah, for sure. Like, who decided what normal thinking even is anyway?
Exactly. It's like that saying, if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree.
It'll spend its whole life thinking it's stupid.
Yeah, exactly.
I love that one. Okay, let's switch gears to the red card switch. Now, this starts with a pretty classic force, right? Where the audience member thinks they're picking any card, but it ends up being that red card he needs.
Right. And then he uses that crimping technique, slightly bending the card so he knows where it is. But what gets me is that he doesn't even use the marked card for the switch at the end.
Oh, so the mark card's just to throw you off.
Totally. You think you're following that card, but the real magic's happening somewhere else entirely.
So sneaky.
Like a twist ending in a movie. You think
Ah.
you know what's going to happen, and then bam, he goes a completely different direction.
I'm sensing a theme here. I mean, he's really good at making you feel like you're in control, but the whole time, he's kind of orchestrating everything.
It's brilliant. He understands that magic isn't just about the tricks, it's about psychology,
Mhm.
playing with what the audience expects and how they see things.
Speaking of playing with expectations, can we circle back to that sponge balls from the mouth thing? I mean, I know we touched on it earlier, but I'm still kind of stuck on why he would open with something so out there.
It's
Yeah.
definitely not your typical opening act, but he actually has a really interesting point about it. He talks about how we're hardwired to notice the unexpected. Like, it's human nature to be drawn to things that break the norm.
Yeah, like why do we rubberneck at car accidents?
Exactly. We can't help but look when something's out of place.
Yeah.
It's that same thing that makes us pay attention when someone breaks the rules.
So it's like by starting with something so weird, he's guaranteeing he's got our attention from the very beginning.
Exactly. And as long as it's done in a fun, lighthearted way, breaking the rules can be a really powerful way to connect with people.
Rules are made to be broken, right?
Well, maybe not all rules. But in the world of performance, sometimes you got to shake things up a bit to really create something memorable.
Totally agree. Okay, so we've got breaking expectations, and then there's that whole embracing the absurd thing he does in that three ropes routine.
Oh, yeah, that one's a perfect example of his comedic timing and his ability to play with the audience. I mean, it's a pretty simple trick. 3 different lengths of rope magically end up being the same size. But he turns it into this whole hilarious act.
With the wands and the breaking and the audience participation, it just keeps getting more and more ridiculous.
And the best part is that everyone's in on it. Like, you know it's silly, but you can't help but laugh because he commits to it so completely.
It's like those moments in comedies where something totally crazy happens and you just have to laugh even though you know it's not real.
Yes, you just go along with it, and it makes the whole thing so much more fun.
And I think there's a bigger message there too, right? About commitment. Like he takes it so far, pushes the absurdity to the limit, and it just becomes infectious.
And it reminds us that it's okay to not take ourselves too seriously sometimes. Like, just let go and have some fun.
Okay, so we've talked about breaking expectations, embracing the absurd. Now let's get into something a bit more subtle, like his wrist tie escape.
Oh, that one's a classic. But he adds that psychological twist where he gets someone from the audience to tie their friend up first. Super tight, just like he'll be tied.
So it takes away any doubt, right? Like, hey, this is for real, folks.
Exactly. It shuts down any skepticism right from the start.
And then, boom, he escapes. And there's got to be some secret move, right? like a way he's twisting the rope without anyone noticing.
And that makes me think about magic in general, and maybe even life. We miss things because we're looking in the wrong place, focusing on the wrong details.
It's like that saying, can't see the forest for the trees.
Exactly. We get so caught up in the big picture, we don't see the little things that really matter.
And in this case, we're so busy staring at the knot, we don't see how he's subtly moving the rope to make the escape happen.
It's a good lesson for how we think about things in our own lives. Like, are we getting the whole story? Or are we missing something because we're stuck in our own heads?
That's deep. I love that. It makes you realize that his magic is about more than just entertainment, right? It's about making you think differently.
Now, let's shift gears a bit and talk about how he tailors his shows to different audiences. We already touched on the card trick he does for the parents at kids' parties.
Oh, right. The one where he pretends to read their minds, but he's really just leading them to pick the right card.
Yeah, it's such a clever way to make them feel involved while still keeping control of the whole thing.
It really shows how important it is to understand who you're talking to, right? Like, you wouldn't talk to a 5-year-old the same way you'd talk to a college professor.
Exactly. And Peter gets that. He knows the parents are the ones who hired him, so he gives them their moment.
Like a little VIP treatment.
Exactly. And it's smart because everyone feels good, appreciated.
This has been amazing so far. We've talked about everything from breaking expectations to embracing the absurd to the psychology behind misdirection. What else is there to uncover about Peter the Adequate?
So much. I mean, we haven't even touched on his thoughts on the theory of magic, or how important silence and timing are, or how he's constantly tweaking his routines to make them better. We've got a lot more to explore.
Can't wait. All right, so as we wrap up our deep dive into Peter the Adequate Arctic, I'm really fascinated by his thoughts on the theory of magic. He seems to put so much emphasis on the psychology of it all, really connecting with the audience.
Oh, absolutely. For him, magic's a conversation, not just him up there doing his thing, but a real back and forth.
Yeah, and that reminds me of what we were saying about the power of silence. He really stresses letting things breathe, giving people time to take it all in.
He actually compares it to the rests in music.
Oh, interesting.
Like they're just as important as the notes, right?
Yeah.
Give it rhythm, build the tension, let the emotions really hit.
It makes you think about how we always rush to fill those silences. Maybe we should just chill sometimes.
Right. Be okay with the quiet. Let things sink in a bit.
He also talks about how he's always tweaking his routines, even the ones he's done for years, like never satisfied.
Always pushing to make it better,
Mhm.
sharper, more surprising. I mean, he even mentions cutting lines from the wrist tie escape that he thought were funny.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, because a look or a double take got a bigger laugh. So it's about being willing to let go of something you thought was clever if it doesn't serve the bigger picture.
It's putting the audience first.
Yeah.
Always.
Exactly.
When I think back to all the stuff we've talked about, it's amazing how he brings it all together. The skill, the psychology, the storytelling. It's captivating.
He's not just doing tricks. It's like he's creating these little moments of wonder, surprise, laughter, and making you think about things in a new way.
That's what makes him more than just a magician. He's like an artist, a communicator.
And in this world where everything's online and on screens, I think his work reminds us of the power of live performance. Being in that room together, experiencing it all at the same time.
There's an energy you just can't get through a screen. It's like going to a concert or a play. It's alive.
Exactly. And Peter, he gets that, that connection, it's special.
And his closing message really sums it up for me. Question everything you strongly believe. It's like, stay curious, keep learning.
And that's something we can all take with us, right? No matter what we do, keep questioning, keep exploring, don't ever let the magic die.
Well said. This deep dive's been incredible. Definitely going to stick with me.
Same here. Who knew we could learn so much from a magician?
Thanks for joining us, everyone. Until next time, keep the wonder alive.